The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and glittering gowns, every corner echoing with laughter and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. Powerful men shook hands, wealthy women flaunted diamonds, and the entire hall buzzed with an air of superiority. But in the middle of all that elegance, a single sound sliced through the air like lightning. Smack! And before we continue, let me ask you, where are you watching this story from? Drop your city or country in the comments, I'd love to know. Gasps erupted as every head turned. A wealthy socialite, known for her arrogance and venomous tongue, had just done the unthinkable. She slapped the billionaire's wife across the face. And not just any wife. She was a proud black woman, poised and radiant in her stunning dress, a figure who already turned heads simply by walking into a room. The hall went silent. Not a whisper, not a breath. Just stunned faces frozen in disbelief. No one had ever dared humiliate the billionaire's wife so brazenly, and yet this woman thought she could. Why? Because she believed money and privilege gave her power over everyone. But in that moment, her smirk began to fade, because she had no idea the storm that was about to hit her. For a long, stretched moment, the room stayed frozen in disbelief, as though time itself had stopped after the slap. The wealthy socialite, still breathing heavily, flicked her hand as if swatting away dust, completely unaware of the grave mistake she had just made. Her eyes darted around, seeking approval, waiting for the other high society guests to back her arrogance. But instead of applause or nods of agreement, she was met with widened eyes, trembling lips, and silence so heavy it could crush her. At the far end of the ballroom, the billionaire himself, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding an aura that made even politicians nervous, slowly rose from his seat. His expression was unreadable at first, but his eyes burned with a cold fire that sent shivers through anyone who dared look too long. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and his steps echoed like thunder as he moved closer to the scene. The socialite's confidence began to crumble with every step he took toward her. The guests whispered behind their hands, trying not to be noticed. Some feared what would happen next, while others secretly relished the drama. But everyone knew one thing: billionaires do not forgive public humiliation. And this wasn't just an insult to his wife, it was an insult to him, to his family, to his empire. The socialite's smirk faltered, her throat went dry, and her knees threatened to give way. She had assumed this would be just another petty display of dominance, a way to remind everyone that she was above outsiders, like the black woman she had dared to strike. But now, staring into the billionaire's eyes, she realized she hadn't humiliated the outsider. She had awakened the fury of the one man no one ever crossed. And as the silence deepened, the crowd leaned in, waiting for the explosion. Would the billionaire defend his wife with words? With power? Or something much, much worse? Just as the billionaire's steps thundered closer, all eyes turned to the woman at the center of the storm, his wife. The very woman who had been struck, humiliated, and reduced to silence in front of hundreds of watchful eyes. For a moment, she stood motionless, her hand resting lightly on her cheek where the sting of the slap still burned. Her dark eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something far more unsettling: dignity and quiet strength. She had not raised her voice, nor had she cowered or lashed back. Instead, she allowed the silence to grow, to choke the room until it became unbearable. And then, she spoke. Her voice was calm, too calm for a woman who had just been assaulted before the world's elite. It carried not anger, but a measured steadiness that cut sharper than any scream. You've revealed more about yourself with that slap than you ever could with your words. The entire hall trembled under the weight of her words. Some guests covered their mouths, others dared not even breathe. The socialite who had delivered the slap blinked rapidly, her once smug expression melting into confusion and fear. She hadn't expected this. She had expected tears, outrage, or at least a plea for pity. But instead, she was being dissected by a single, poised sentence. The billionaire stopped in his tracks, watching his wife reclaim the narrative with nothing but composure. And yet, the air grew more suffocating. Because everyone knew, his silence meant the storm was still building. His wife's calmness wasn't the end of the drama. It was the spark before the explosion. Whispers surged like wildfire. Some murmured about the wife's grace, while others whispered warnings: this isn't over. Not by a long shot. And in that tension, the socialite felt her chest tighten. For the first time, the weight of her mistake began to crush her. She wasn't just fighting the billionaire's wrath anymore, she was facing a woman who commanded respect without even raising her voice. And the question that now burned through every mind in that ballroom was the same: what will the billionaire do next, now that his wife has spoken? The silence was unbearable, stretching so long that some guests began to shift nervously in their seats. And then, like a clap of thunder, the billionaire finally moved. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor as he advanced, every step heavy with menace, every breath signaling that something earth-shattering was about to unfold. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the veins in his temple pulsed, and though he hadn't yet spoken a single word, his mere presence sent ripples of dread through the entire ballroom. The guests knew him, not just as a man of obscene wealth, but as someone who carried power that could make or break lives with a single decision. His empire stretched across continents, his name etched into skylines, his influence woven into governments. He wasn't just a man. He was a storm disguised in a suit. And tonight, someone had dared to humiliate the woman he loved most in the world, in his house, during his celebration. He stopped directly in front of the trembling socialite, who only minutes before had been laughing proudly after landing her slap. Now, her face had gone pale, her lips quivered as if searching for words, but her voice had abandoned her. She stared at the floor, afraid to meet his eyes, because those eyes no longer looked human, they looked like fire barely restrained. Finally, the billionaire spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but deadly, like the rumble before an earthquake. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" His words rolled through the hall, striking harder than the slap itself. No one dared move. Some guests even lowered their heads, afraid that eye contact alone might implicate them in this unfolding storm. The socialite stuttered, her throat dry, her confidence shattered. But the billionaire didn't wait for her to answer. His voice grew sharper, louder, slicing through the silence like a blade. "You think her skin makes her less? You think her place beside me is unearned? Let me tell you what you've really done tonight. You've revealed your own ugliness to the world. You've proven that wealth cannot buy class, and privilege cannot disguise rot."
Gasps swept through the audience. This wasn't just a defense. This was a public execution, social, reputational, and possibly financial. The socialite stumbled backward, her knees weakening under the weight of his words, as though every syllable was stripping her of her power. The very people who once clung to her side now inched away, fearful of being caught in her downfall. The billionaire's fury wasn't reckless, it was precise. He wasn't just defending his wife. He was rewriting the story. And the longer he spoke, the more it became clear, this was not going to end with just words. Something bigger was coming. Something no one in that ballroom was prepared to witness. And as his voice dropped to a chilling whisper, the tension spiked to unbearable heights. "You made the mistake of striking my wife. But tonight, the world will watch you pay for it." The audience froze. Everyone knew it now, this wasn't simply about revenge. This was about to become legendary. The billionaire's final words still hung in the air like a guillotine waiting to fall, and the socialite could barely stand. Her palms were clammy, her breathing uneven, her once proud posture crumbled into something small and broken. But then, something happened that no one in the room, not even his wife, had expected. The billionaire raised his hand. Not to strike, not to lash out, but to summon. Within seconds, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall creaked open, and his team of personal security strode in, their expressions unreadable, their presence suffocating. The entire ballroom seemed to shrink, every guest suddenly aware that they were no longer at a simple gala. They were in a court, and the billionaire was both judge and executioner. The socialite's eyes darted around, desperate for an ally, but found none. Those who once adored her now refused to meet her gaze, terrified that even a shred of association might draw the billionaire's wrath upon them. Her lips trembled as she stammered, I didn't mean, it was just a joke," but her excuses sounded hollow, pitiful, lost against the billionaire's cold silence. Then, with a subtle gesture, he commanded one of the guards forward. In a single motion, the guard placed something on the grand stage, a microphone, a chair, and a blinding spotlight that clicked on, drowning the socialite in harsh white light. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't going to be handled behind closed doors. This was going to be public. This was going to be unforgettable. The billionaire's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You struck her in front of everyone. Now, in front of everyone, you will face what that means." His tone carried no malice, no shouting, just lethal certainty. The kind of certainty that made the entire ballroom shiver. The socialite shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, not here, don't do this to me," she begged, her voice cracking. But her pleas only fueled the anticipation of the audience. People leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity clawing at them. What was he about to do? How far would his retribution go? And then, the billionaire did something shocking. Instead of unleashing anger, he turned the humiliation back into a brutal mirror. He announced to the crowd, "Tonight, this woman believed she was powerful enough to raise her hand against my wife. Tonight, she will explain to all of you why. She will tell us what makes her better, or she will admit the truth that she is nothing." The crowd gasped again. The socialite's knees buckled. Her carefully constructed world of wealth and privilege, built over decades, was unraveling in minutes. Every second under the burning spotlight felt like fire against her skin. Her reputation wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. The room buzzed, tension spilling like electricity. This was no longer about a slap. This was about a man proving that no one, no matter how rich, glamorous, or arrogant, could disrespect his wife and walk away unscathed. And as the billionaire's icy gaze locked on her trembling figure, one thought consumed every soul in that hall: this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The hall was so quiet that even the ticking of a distant clock felt like thunder. Every pair of eyes was glued to the stage where the trembling socialite stood trapped under the merciless spotlight. The billionaire hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened violence, and yet his calmness was far more terrifying than rage. It was the silence before a storm, and everyone knew when it broke, no one would forget. The socialite's knees wobbled as she tried to form words. I didn't mean it," she stammered, her voice echoing pathetically through the microphone. Her once flawless image, the woman known for poise, diamonds, and an air of untouchable superiority, now looked like a crumbling mask barely holding together. But the billionaire only tilted his head, studying her like one might study a criminal on trial. "You didn't mean it," he said slowly, his words carrying the weight of 1,000 judgments. "Then explain. Tell us all, what exactly did you mean when you raised your hand against my wife?" The crowd gasped. No one expected him to force her confession publicly. People shifted forward, hungry, disturbed, yet unable to look away. The woman's lips trembled. She tried to answer, but the weight of the moment pressed her down like iron chains. Suddenly, the billionaire signaled again. One of his assistants entered carrying a sleek black folder. He placed it in the billionaire's hands, and what came next made the socialite freeze in horror. The billionaire opened it slowly, then read aloud, "Interesting. You've spent years parading as a woman of class, yet here are documents of debts you've hidden. Investments gone wrong. Bribes you paid to silence staff. Lies you told to climb your way into this circle of wealth." A sharp cry escaped the woman's lips. "No! That's private, how did you?" But her protest was drowned out by murmurs spreading like wildfire through the hall. People who once admired her were now whispering, gossiping, exchanging scandalized glances. Her empire of respect and admiration was being dismantled brick by brick in real time. The billionaire leaned closer to the microphone, his voice deep and steady. "You thought humiliating my wife would make you powerful. But look around you, who do you think is humiliated now?" His words echoed like a gavel striking judgment. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mascara smearing, her glamorous image melting into something raw and pitiful. She reached out as if someone in the crowd might save her, but no one moved. No ally, no friend, not even the people she once considered her closest circle dared to intervene. They all knew to stand against the billionaire in this moment was to invite ruin. And then, just when it seemed her shame had peaked, the billionaire delivered the cruelest twist yet. He announced, "Since you chose to strike my wife in public, you will apologize in public. Not just to her, but to every guest in this room. You will bow to her, here and now, for all to see." The crowd erupted with gasps. Bow? A woman of her status? The very idea was unthinkable, humiliating on a level so deep it might scar her forever. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She shook her head violently, whispering, "No please, anything but that." But the billionaire didn't flinch. His expression was stone, his authority absolute. The spotlight burned hotter, the silence heavier, until it became unbearable. Everyone leaned in, breathless with anticipation, wondering, would she defy him? Would she break completely? Or would she surrender to the most degrading act of her life? The ballroom felt suspended in time, every heartbeat thundering with one question: what would she do next? The woman's body trembled violently as the billionaire's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Her reputation, her pride, her carefully constructed empire of elegance, all of it balanced on the edge of destruction. She had spent years portraying herself as untouchable, yet now she was being asked to do the unthinkable, bow, publicly, to the very woman she had just humiliated. For a long, agonizing moment, she stood frozen, her eyes darting across the sea of faces staring at her. She searched for support, for pity, for anyone who might step forward and end her nightmare. But all she found were eyes filled with judgment, curiosity, or barely concealed satisfaction. Not a single person dared to intervene. It was as if the entire ballroom had turned into an arena, and she was the spectacle being fed to the crowd. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "Please, not this. Anything but this." Her voice cracked like fragile glass, carrying more desperation than dignity. But the billionaire remained unmoved, his face carved from stone, his authority unshakable. He repeated his command, each word delivered with terrifying finality, "Bow to my wife. Here. Now." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, slowly, with the grace of a puppet whose strings had been cut, the woman sank to her knees. The sound of her expensive jewelry clattering against the marble floor rang through the hall like a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, not in applause, but in a stunned, collective gasp. People clutched their pearls, covered their mouths, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Tears streamed freely down her face, leaving dark trails through her ruined makeup. She lowered her head, her hair falling forward like a curtain to hide the humiliation burning in her eyes. Her voice cracked again as she forced the words out, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, forgive me." But just as the crowd thought the billionaire might accept her apology, he did something that shocked everyone even further. He stepped aside, motioning toward his wife. "Don't say it to me," he declared coldly. "Say it to the woman you insulted. Look her in the eyes. Show her the respect you denied her." The billionaire's wife, who had stood silently through the ordeal, stepped forward. The crowd's anticipation grew unbearable. Would she grant forgiveness? Would she take revenge? The socialite raised her tear-streaked face, her eyes red and swollen, and whispered again, "I'm sorry." But the wife didn't answer. She simply looked down at the kneeling woman, her gaze calm, unreadable, but with a quiet strength that silenced the entire hall. That silence was louder than any words could have been. The billionaire's demand had reduced the proud socialite to a broken figure on the floor, and yet, something about the wife's stillness made the humiliation even deeper. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the wife forgive her publicly? Would she walk away, leaving the woman in shame? Or would she deliver the final blow, something so unforgettable that it would echo for years? The ballroom trembled with anticipation, the weight of what was to come pressing down on every single person. And then, just when it seemed like the humiliation had reached its peak, the billionaire's wife finally opened her mouth. The ballroom was silent, so silent that the faint ticking of the grand clock on the wall echoed like thunder. Every eye was fixed on the billionaire's wife, waiting for her to speak, waiting to know if mercy or vengeance would fall from her lips. She had stood quietly all this time, radiating a quiet dignity, a strength that seemed unshakable. Now, with the socialite on her knees before her, broken and humiliated, it was her moment to decide how this story would end. She stepped forward slowly, each click of her heels on the polished marble floor slicing through the suffocating silence. The crowd held its breath, watching as she stopped just inches away from the trembling woman. The billionaire's wife tilted her head, her eyes narrowing, not with hatred, but with something far more unsettling, calm authority. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost gentle, but every word carried a blade's edge. "You slapped me in front of everyone tonight," she began, her tone steady. "Not because I wronged you, but because you believed I was beneath you. You looked at my skin and decided it made me less. You thought wealth and status gave you the right to insult me." Her words were not shouted, yet they struck the crowd harder than any scream could have. People shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the insult had not just been against her, it was against dignity, against humanity itself. The socialite's tears spilled harder, her mascara streaking like rivers of shame. She tried to mutter another apology, but the billionaire's wife silenced her with a single raised hand. "No," she said firmly. Don't say sorry to me because you're forced to. Say sorry because you realize the truth that no amount of money, diamonds, or influence makes you better than another human being. The crowd erupted into hushed whispers, the words slicing through them like lightning. The billionaire's wife wasn't just addressing her attacker anymore, she was addressing everyone in the room. Her courage, her strength, her unshakable composure, it transformed her from a victim into a force that commanded the respect of all present. And then, with a grace that made her presence even more overwhelming, she leaned down slightly, meeting the socialite's tear-soaked eyes directly. You wanted to break me in front of all these people. But look around, who is broken now? Who is on her knees? Remember this moment every time you think of raising your hand against another woman, every time you think wealth makes you superior. This shame you feel now, it's the same pain you tried to give me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people even clapped, unable to hold back their admiration. The socialite, now sobbing uncontrollably, buried her face in her hands, knowing the billionaire's wife had spoken a truth so sharp, so undeniable, that her reputation would never recover. But the billionaire's wife wasn't finished. She straightened her back, her voice rising just slightly as she delivered the final blow. I don't need your apology. I don't need your forgiveness. What I need is for you to live with this night burned into your memory forever, because respect cannot be bought, and dignity cannot be stolen. The crowd exploded, some in applause, some in stunned silence, others recording every second of the historic confrontation. In one moment, the billionaire's wife had gone from silent victim to the most powerful person in the room. The socialite remained on the floor, trembling, begging with her eyes for forgiveness that would never come. And as the wife turned to walk away, the crowd surged forward with curiosity and awe, whispering, gasping, wondering what would happen next. Would the billionaire intervene? Would security drag the socialite away? Or would the humiliation somehow get worse? Social media erupted, painting Cola as everything from a miracle worker to a parasite. Some praised Richard as a hero, saying, finally, a man of wealth uses his riches for good. Others sneered with venom, claiming, he's lost his mind. That boy will steal, that boy will destroy him. The Lawson empire, built on oil and steel, suddenly shook under the weight of something far more volatile, public opinion. Inside his office towers, Richard faced a war of words. His board members muttered about risk, about investors fleeing, about scandal overshadowing profits. At a late-night meeting, one man even slammed his fist on the table, shouting, Richard, this boy could undo everything. You can't put a beggar beside your daughter and expect the world to accept it. People will think you've gone soft. Another added, if you care about your empire, send him away before it's too late. But Richard sat in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes burning not with shame but with anger. These men, who measured everything in dollars and deals, could not see what he had seen, his daughter clapping, laughing, even moving again. They saw a threat. He saw a miracle. And though his pride whispered to protect his image, his heart thundered a louder truth, my daughter's life is worth more than your empire. Yet the storm raged on. Amanda's school friends whispered cruelly when they visited, some of their wealthy parents pulling them aside, hissing, do not go near that boy. He is dirty. He does not belong here. At charity galas, Richard's old acquaintances raised eyebrows, masking their judgment with forced smiles. Behind closed doors, some mocked him outright. Lawson has turned his mansion into a circus, one rival laughed. First a crippled daughter, now a street rat? What's next? But the cruelest blow came not from strangers, but from within the mansion itself. One evening, as Cola practiced silly impressions in the living room, the butler, loyal to Richard for decades, finally broke his silence. His voice was low, but it cut like a knife. Sir, forgive me for speaking out of place, but this boy, he will bring shame. I beg you, send him away before it is too late. He is not one of us. He will never be one of us. Richard's eyes flared, torn between loyalty to a man who had served him faithfully and the bond he saw growing between Cola and Amanda. But before he could speak, Amanda wheeled forward, her small voice trembling with fury. Don't you dare call him that. Cola is my friend. If you send him away, I will never smile again. Her words pierced the air like a blade, silencing every breath in the room. And in that moment, Richard understood something shocking. The world might reject Kola, his staff might despise him, his empire might even collapse under scandal, but his daughter had made her choice. Her healing was bound to this boy. To cut Kola away would be to kill the fragile hope that had returned to her life. Still, Richard knew storms were only beginning. Business partners threatened to walk away. Journalists circled like vultures. Even enemies he had crushed in the corporate world saw this as weakness they could exploit. Yet, in the quiet of the night, as Richard stood by Amanda's door watching her sleep peacefully for the first time in years, he realized a terrifying, wonderful truth: the boy he had once thought of as a trespasser was now the lifeline of his daughter's soul. And though the world outside screamed scandal, Richard felt a question clawing at his chest, one he dared not say aloud. Could this ragged boy be the key not only to Amanda's healing, but to his own salvation? The scandal outside was boiling, but inside the Lawson mansion, something far more powerful was quietly taking shape. Each afternoon, Kola's visits turned the grand marble halls into a stage of laughter and hope. Amanda, once a silent shadow of herself, now greeted him with a glow in her cheeks, her small hands ready to clap, her giggles echoing off the walls like music. What the world saw as a disgrace, Richard began to see as destiny. One hot afternoon, when the cicadas screeched in the garden and the air was heavy with the promise of rain, Kola was in the middle of his most dramatic routine yet, a slow-motion dance where he moved as if underwater, stretching each step with exaggerated effort. Amanda was laughing so hard tears rolled down her cheeks. Her laughter was wild, unrestrained, like the spirit of a child reborn. But then, in the middle of her giggles, she suddenly went silent. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair, her face set with a strange determination Richard hadn't seen since before the accident. "Wait," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "Let me try something." Kola froze mid-spin. Richard, watching from the balcony, felt his chest seize. The maids leaned in from the doorway, eyes wide, their hands clutched together as if in prayer. Even the guards at the gates turned, sensing something was happening. Amanda pressed her small palms against the armrests. At first, nothing happened. Her shoulders shook, her face twisted with effort, her arms trembling like thin branches in the wind. But then, to Richard's utter shock, her hips shifted. Slowly. Painfully. But undeniably. She lifted herself an inch, then another. Her fragile body, bound to a chair for so long, was rising. "Come on, Mandy, you can do it," Kola whispered, his voice breaking, his eyes glistening. He crouched beside her, hands hovering as though to catch her if she fell, but he didn't touch. He only gave her his presence, his belief. 1. Kola counted, his grin wide with hope. 2. Richard shouted, unable to stop himself, stepping forward as tears blurred his vision. 3. Amanda gasped, holding herself upright for what felt like eternity. The entire mansion fell into stunned silence. Even the staff who once despised Kola stood frozen, their mouths open, their hearts pounding. Amanda, the girl who had not stood since the night of the crash, was up on her trembling legs, her hair falling into her face, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a fire no doctor had ever been able to spark. And then, with a soft cry, she sank back into her chair. But instead of despair, she threw her head back and laughed, a laugh so bright it felt like it split the sky. "Daddy! Did you see me? I stood. I really stood." Richard dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he cradled her face. "I saw, sweetheart," he choked, his tears falling freely. "And I have never been prouder in my life."